There were once passageways to the old world, strange trails, hidden paths. You turn a corner and suddenly find yourself face to face with the great mystery, the foundation of all things.
Train Dreams feels like one of these passageways, a film so unique in its ways that many a viewer have claimed they just don't make them like this anymore. Only they did. They still do, at least a little. There are still plenty of fantastic films still coming out. The Oscars are proof of that. But there's one that stuck with me the most.
This is brilliant, but I like this.
Train Dreams was directed by Clint Bentley, perhaps the most appropriate person for the job. While preparing to make the film, Bentley lost both of his parents and had his first son. By feeling these extremes of both incredible happiness and immense loss, he was perfectly positioned to take on such a task. Bentley co-wrote the film with his creative partner, Greg Quidar, based on the novella by Dennis Johnson. Visually and thematically, the film is beautiful, a meditation on life, death, and grief. It reminds me of other media in many ways, films, books, television, and video games. But in others, it just feels so unique, a voice maintained only by the film and its original novella. There's a lot that's already been said about them, and much more that could be said, and hopefully will be. But what strikes me the most is its messages, its interpretations of both trains and dreams, and of nature, its creatures, and its curses. So feel free to join me for a little bit while I talk about Train Dreams.
Lately I've been having dreams.
And even though that old world is gone now, you can still feel the echo of it.
The film's opening moments immediately set the tone. You don't know where you are, what you're doing, or where you're going, but what does become clear is how you're going to get there, eventually. Maybe not in a straight line, and probably with several stops on the way, but eventually. What an intelligent way to use the film's editing language to set the scene and enhance the tone.
Time kind of folds in on itself, and everything's kind of existing in one moment. Things that happened 10 years ago for this guy are existing in this moment as he's having this experience.
This mirrors the book too, where one chapter might jump backwards and forwards, 40 years in the future, then 30 years, then 10, then back to Robert's childhood decades earlier, then forwards again through a series of brief vignettes. As Jacqueline Jones writes, it is fundamentally ahistorical. Grenier lives for 80 years, but he remains outside the mainstream of American life. The story moves at its own pace, its own dreamlike non-linear tempo, maintaining Dennis Johnson's lyrical words not just thematically but literally through the narration of Will Patton, who also wonderfully narrated the audiobook. Like the novella, it allows the viewer to subtly enter Grenier's world without changing who he is, a man of few words. The words that are used make the world feel more alive. The dialogue isn't pretentious, the characters don't recite the themes to the viewer, let alone understand the themes themselves. When a character delivers a kind of eulogy partway through the film, one might be mistaken for thinking he's about to impart some kind of wisdom. But besides a brief comment about something someone else said, and an aside to clarify that he doesn't actually know what meaning to take from that, his only lesson is, we can all get along.
In Jesus' name.
Amen.
And of course that's his only lesson. This is a man whose sole contribution earlier is to state that he just feels itchy inside after every job, who in some cut dialogue had never heard of Buddha, and who later forgets that his friend had even died. This is just a regular old man, delivering not an intellectual or prophetic monologue, but just regular, unfiltered thoughts and reflections. It's simple and it's real, and it's why this film so often works so well for me. It captures real life, real connections, life's boredoms and its excitements. As one reviewer so eloquently puts it, Train Dreams moves like memory itself, unhurried and sometimes fragile, aware that the meaning of a life is rarely found in large gestures, but in the small moments that echo long after they pass. Dennis Johnson was well aware of the importance of small moments. In the early 1990s, Johnson bought a house in North Idaho. According to his friend, the painter Sam Messer, he wanted to be on his own, and the purpose of moving to Idaho was to get as far away from anybody as possible. According to another friend, the writer Chris Offutt, it was the only place he could afford. It should come as no surprise that around 1996, this is where he started writing Train Dreams. And equally, it should come as no surprise that his initial method of doing so, like many of his works, was in the small moments. Scribbled ideas, random observations, clippings of newspaper articles and interesting anecdotes. On one note, a grocery list: eggs, pancake mix, artificial creamer. On the reverse, the thematic crux of the story, the bookends of Granier's life. One might call it dreamlike, poetic. Others perhaps normal, ordinary, pedestrian. All, it seems, describe the result. Johnson had 3 rules to writing, which he would often share. 1. Write naked. That means to write what you would never say. 2. Write in blood, as if ink is so precious you can't waste it. 3. Write in exile, as if you were never going to get home again, and you have to call back every detail. Whether or not he actually followed his own rules literally is unclear, and besides the point, and not really something I need answered. What is clear is that the results speak as though he did. His words are honest, their selection meticulous, and the details blindingly sharp. He can describe reality as dreams, and dreams as entirely lifelike, and yet the difference can be indistinguishable. As Anthony Wallace wrote, the world he creates is the real world, but always teetering on hallucination, on myth, on turning into something other than its plain, concrete, realistic surface. It is the world on the verge of spiritual transcendence and illumination, and it is the world on the verge of nothingness. It is the world we know and don't know, and it seems always to vanish before our eyes, just as Granier's world seems to vanish before his. $17.6 karat gold, 400 grams in weight, 14 centimeters in length, tapped into place with a special silver pledge by the robber baron Leland Stanford, a gesture as ceremonial as his actual participation. On May 10, 1869, the last spike of America's first transcontinental railroad was driven. Marking the occasion is an iconic photograph by Andrew J. Russell, featuring at least 100 men. There's one notable group of workers who are significantly underrepresented in this photograph though. Because of course Stanford's gesture was ceremonial. In fact, he missed the spike the first time. No, the golden spike was quickly removed, the telegrams were sent, and then the actual last spikes were driven by a group of workers. Probably, it seems, Chinese workers. Which seems appropriate, considering Chinese migrants represented up to 90% of the total workforce on the western half of the railroad, around 15 to 23,000 workers, the largest corporate wage labor force in the 19th century Americas. Yet when it came time to take this photograph, of the group of more than 100 workers, 2, according to Stanford researchers, are Chinese. When it came to paying them, the Chinese workers' wages were 30 to 50% lower than their white co-workers, not increasing by much even after a labor strike. And when it came to the hundreds, possibly thousands of Chinese workers who died while building the railroad that moved America to the forefront of the world stage, they largely went unnoticed, barely newsworthy, and never referenced by name. The Chinese laborer in Train Dreams is also never named in the novella nor the film itself, but he is every bit as real as the men who lost their lives working on the railroads. When he is tossed over the side of the bridge, it's every bit as real as the violence that Chinese people suffered at the hands of others. And when Granier fails to do anything to stop it, or in the case of the novella, actively helps the aggressors, if only briefly, it's as real as the real bystanders who do nothing while unforgivable violence is occurring. The encapsulation of discrimination, exploitation, and vulnerability.
What's he doing?
Even the film and novella make it clear that this was all too common.
One of his earliest memories was that of observing the mass deportation of 100 or more Chinese families from the town.
Not unlike a real event that occurred in the town of Bonners Ferry, Idaho in 1892, wherein 50 Chinese railroad workers were forced out by its white residents. Not to mention many other similar incidents occurring all over the country at the time.
Granier was baffled by the casualness of the violence.
While neither version named the Chinese laborer directly though, he was still given a name for the film, Fu Sheng. As his actor Alfred Sing notes, Fu means blessing or good fortune, and Sheng means birth or life. So together, the name suggests a life full of blessings, a full and abundant life. Like everyone else, a life full of his own hopes and dreams, cut short by the harsh reality of inexplicable hate, prejudice, and discrimination. And sure enough, Granier feels ashamed for his actions, in the novella for taking part, in the film for standing by. He believes he's been cursed, only reinforced every time he notices Fu Sheng watching him. From Alfred Sing's perspective, for quiet connection and understanding after death, but from Granier's, it was to haunt him. One might wonder if, in the years that followed, Granier tried to redeem himself for his actions, tried to do better, and live a fuller life. One wonders if, with his words, Dennis Johnson, whose addictions led him down a road of violence and depravity, tried to do the same. Grenier spends some of the rest of his life, insofar as the film depicts, waiting for death, thinking his time is coming, thinking the branch that killed his friend was intended for him.
He began to feel a dread that the snag had been meant for him.
He continues to suspect that punishment was coming, and soon enough, he would feel he had been proven right.
This world is intricately stitched together, boys. Every thread we pull, we know not how it affects the design of things. We are but children on this earth, pulling bolts out of a Ferris wheel, thinking ourselves to be gods.
The natural world ekes into every element of Train Dreams. Practically every shot showcases the beauty of nature, shot with natural light, around actual fires, with room for improvisation and spontaneity wherever nature demanded. It's something that the writers considered an integral and defining part of Johnson's novella, something that the director wanted to reconnect with, having felt disconnected since his childhood, and something so important to the cinematographer that he considered it its own character in the film. Nature may not be named in the cast, but the film would be utterly unrecognizable without it. The woods in which Grenier builds his house could be considered a character unto itself. In the novella, he acquires the acre from a colonist, and in an appropriately Lockean fashion, thereby makes it his property. The woodlands provide Grenier with shelter, provide his family their safety, and grant him part of his livelihood. But what is giveth may be taketh away. As Dominic Davies identified, even as Train Dreams returns over and over again to this narrative deepening of colonial property lines into the American landscape, it at the same renders Grenier's markings as finite and dissoluble. After all, nature wouldn't be much of a main character if Grenier had simply acquired land and worked his job without response or consequence. As the man grows older, the forests grow thinner, its trees downed at a rate hitherto inconceivable. The frontier gives way, Grenier's quiet solitude taken from him, the world outgrowing him. But industrialism waits for nobody and is not Grenier's primary obstacle. Nature and climate crises also pose an ongoing, almost retaliatory threat against the efforts of industry. His friend, Arn Peoples, is hit by a stray branch and dies. Grenier too is hit and injured. In the novella, a vicious flood rips through a town, carrying several structures with it. And most cruelly, a forest fire destroys Grenier's home and takes his wife and daughter away from him. Perhaps the retaliation is an allegory of the climate crisis and for Grenier's involvement in human industrialization, a connection between ecological destruction and climate instability. Maybe it's a response to his failure to save Fu Sheng, nature's own response to violence and exploitation, or for his participation, however unintentional or in good faith, in imperialism and colonialism. In any case, it's hard to deny that it's all connected.
It's all threaded together, so you can't tell where one thing ends and another begins if you really look at it. There must be something for us to learn from that. The world needs a hermit in the woods as much as a preacher in the pulpit, you know?
As the Dartmouth's Isabella Konecki expertly summarized, you can't impose a value hierarchy on nature. Early in the story, Grenier's knowledge and understanding of nature and the natural world is about as regular or elementary as one might expect. He liked it, the grand size of things in the woods, the feeling of being lost and far away. But it's not clear that he had any deeper insight or feeling than this. He felt safe there, with so many trees as wardens, no danger could find him. Except it did. After he loses his wife and daughter in an unstoppable fire, after he takes time to grieve, to live among the natural world in a state of complete isolation, Grenier's mind, it seems, begins to open. His knowledge becomes deeper, his observations more astute, a revelation of sorts. He no longer sees the woods just for their size and isolation. Now he sees clusters of orange butterflies exploding off the blackish-purple piles of bear sign and winking and fluttering magically like leaves without trees. In one of the novella's most stunning moments, he stands on a cliff and observes Spruce Lake, its flat surface as still and black as obsidian, engulfed in the shadow of surrounding cliffs, ringed with a double ring of evergreens and reflected evergreens. Beyond, he saw the Canadian Rockies still sunlit, snow-peaked 100 miles away, as if the earth were in the midst of its creation, the mountains taking their substance out of the clouds. He'd never seen so grand a prospect. Nature is no longer just something to observe or exist within, or even simply to be marveled at, though it continues to remain good for each. Now it takes on new meaning, new sophistication, an epiphany, an opportunity to be truly connected and fully immersed in life and its mysteries. And here, finally, he felt the curse had left him.
How much does she know, do you think? As much as a dog pup?
A dog pup can live on its own after its mama weans it away.
Robert's clueless, obsequious nature around his wife, Gladys, is one of the most endearing parts of the first half of Train Dreams. He asks her questions and requests that she speaks just so he can keep hearing her voice. He fawns over her, often awkwardly. Even after they have a child together, that hardly changes. They're still getting used to the rhythm of each other's bodies. Gladys's answer to Robert about babies and dog pups is endearing too. She's patient and more intelligent, and it's sweet to see them interact. But as the story continues, her comments seem to take on a deeper meaning. Earlier, before their cabin is built, Gladys says that they'll need a dog, and Robert agrees. Later, after the fire, when Robert is all alone, he gets some, by no choice of his own.
Where'd you all come from?
And in a way, he fulfills his agreement with Gladys. Grania wonders if the dog pups are actually part wolf. Ignatius Jack, in the book known as Kootenai Bob, says it's impossible. But in a scene omitted from the film, he admits there's a possibility. And considering the land they're on, perhaps there's some symbolism here. Bonner's Ferry is the home of the Kootenai tribe of Idaho, one of several bands of the indigenous Tunaka of southwestern Canada and northwestern United States. Each, of course, is unique in several ways, but there is a Tunaka creation story that relates to many. In it, the chief animal named much of the land and essentially saved it, leaving the people to be its keepers. Many moons later, the Tunaka, like most indigenous peoples, faced great trauma in the form of forced assimilation and near annihilation. In dealing with this struggle, in the words of one elder, the Tunaka patterned themselves on several land and air animals that have been subjected to their own near extinction: the coyote, the raven, and, most powerfully, the wolf. As Tanya Langar wrote, in echoing the creation story, the Tunaka sing the wolf's songs and say its prayers as a means of calling that power to themselves. Animals are guiding spirits of the people, and they look to this animal specifically for guidance, seeing it as a very powerful warrior and a symbol of what has happened to their people. Perhaps it's no coincidence then that Red Dog and her pups arrive just as Grania is at his loneliest, then disappear shortly after rebuilding his cabin's walls, providing him comfort, companionship, and guidance when he is at his most desperate. Then, as Grania decides his career as a logger is over, as he begins to doubt that his life will ever receive its great revelation, she returns, accompanying him once more through the new revelations of his life. Sometime after Red Dog's return, Grania has a dream. Kate, his daughter, who never even growed up to a sprout, who'd hardly been awake, much less alive, had survived. Separately, in the novella, he hears tales of a wolf girl, a creature God didn't create, made out of wolves and a man of unnatural desires. In a sequence from the novella that was scripted for the film but omitted, in 1930, Kootenai Bob is swindled by a group of white settlers, tricked into getting drunk for the first time in his life, and killed by a succession of trains. As the Kootenai spend days collecting any of his belongings they can find spread along the tracks, the train moved slowly, blowing a series of long notes as it went, and disrupting the natural world as it did so. The whistle got the coyotes started, and then the wolves, sounding in the hundreds, and maybe other creatures too, owls, eagles, surely every single animal with a voice along the peaks and ridges, as if nothing could ease any of God's beasts. And then, as if Kootenai Bob himself had sent for her, the wolf girl arrived in Grania's yard, and he recognized her.
Katie.
And suddenly, Gladys's answer takes on new meaning.
A dog pup can live on its own after its mama weans it away. Baby couldn't just go off and live after it was weaned.
Perhaps the wolf girl isn't actually Kate. Perhaps after hearing about the existence of the wolf girl, after learning more about dogs and wolves from Ignatius Jack and from Red Dog and her pups, and after having dreams about his wife and daughter in the midst of the flames, well, perhaps he simply wants it to be Kate. Perhaps he needs it to be. Or perhaps it's not so far-fetched. In a peculiar scene later in the novella, Grania has a period of intense arousal, 2 weeks of being in heat, himself like a dog or wolf, crossing the line between human and non-human, that doesn't subside until he stands upon the cliff and gazes out at the world. Maybe it's not so strange that his offspring became the wolf girl after all. Or perhaps there's a deeper connection, closer to reality. Maybe, as Wyatt Williams theorized, there's a resemblance between the wolf girl and Dennis Johnson's connection with his own son, a lost child returning hurt, almost unrecognizable, in need of help. Perhaps, in a way, Johnson was recognizing his own failures as a parent, not there for his child, just as Grania is unable to be there for his. Maybe he needed this. Grania certainly did. For years, Grania has dreams. For years, these dreams had the distant call of a train. And for years, these calls, like the howls of the wolves, dogs, and coyotes, would wake him suddenly, ripping him from that world into this one. After Grania sees his daughter again, after he saves her only for her to leave for the wilderness once more, the train's call no longer wakes him, but enters his dream. Grania, if only briefly, had been reunited with his daughter. To his knowledge, she is alive and safe, and the train dreams don't wake him anymore. That the familiar world is often unsatisfactory cannot be denied, but it is not for all that one we need abandon. Bad as it is, the world is potentially full of good photographs, but to be good, photographs have to be full of the world. It would be difficult to deny that Dorothea Lange's photographs were full of the world. In the 1930s, as the world suffered through the Great Depression, Lange captured its impact in the United States in several iconic photos. One somber portrait in particular, it's been said, has achieved near-mythical status, symbolizing, if not defining, an entire era in the nation's history. Lange's unique visual language, ordinary in nature and extraordinary in execution, is similarly felt in the visuals of Train Dreams, and not by accident. The film cinematographer spoke of Lange's work capturing the beauty within chaos and sadness and grief, the way she isolates characters, framing them in corners and on edges. The camera largely sits still in Grania's youth, like a photograph, and begins to move to follow him as he ages, similarly capturing that beauty within chaos and sadness and grief. The second half of Train Dreams is really about this grief, an invisible grief, a deep-seated trauma that many will carry throughout their life. And in trying to explain this grief, Grania summarizes it with surprising clarity.
You see, sometimes it feels like the sadness will just eat me alive, but sometimes it feels like it happened to somebody else.
Train Dreams doesn't answer or simplify what grief really is, or make any kind of judgment about whether one should either overcome or succumb to it. It doesn't need to. The story goes on. Grania still grieves, seemingly until the day he dies, but he continues to live, not letting the bitterness devour him or stop him from appreciating the quiet moments. As Rahul Menon wrote, the film avoids melodrama and instead leans into the contemplative truth of how grief unfolds. Sometimes it is a gentle haunting, a voice in the trees, a flicker of movement in the corner of memory. Sometimes it is a question with no clear answer. What is a life? Who do we become when time continues without us? One thing that Train Dreams makes clear is that time does continue, with or without us, like a train. And in this story, though it largely goes forward, it also goes backwards, like a train. Train Dreams does not end with Grania's death, though it does depict that too. It moves on from his ending to give us ours, though its exact final breath differs by medium. In the novella, Grania, some 33 years before his death, attends a show where he sees a wolf boy. But this boy isn't just a spectacle, a comedic sideshow performer for the crowd to simply laugh at, though they did that at first too. They go silent as the wolf boy takes the stage, and he lets out a howl so unique and life-changing that it takes Johnson a full 120-word sentence to describe it. And suddenly it all went black, and that time was gone forever. What a unique and profound way to describe the end of this era, of this irretrievable period in human history. Something that other pieces of art have done, and done beautifully in their own ways, but never, in my experience, like this. And while the film at one point shared the same ending, the final version took a different approach, because the story of the adaptation isn't necessarily about the end of an era, important and relevant though it may be. It's about the story of Robert Grania, his life, and his grief. And in the film's closing minutes, it once again shows us something that has recurred throughout Grania's life, and something that never fails to be relevant in our own. Finding joy and meaning in the smaller moments. When the pilot tells him to hold on, she's not just talking about the plane. As Grenier is up in the plane, as he is looking over the ever-evolving world below him, perhaps even less recognizable to him now as when he stepped off the train as a child, he thinks of his life. But not just the life we've already seen, new things, alternative versions of scenes, memories now ingrained in Grenier's mind, even if, not unlike real memories, the actual events occur differently in life. The human mind is precious, its memories fragile. That he remembers slightly different versions of these events speaks a little to the film's themes. Life is a mystery. It will always be a mystery, but we needn't understand it to appreciate it, to live and enjoy it fully. We needn't require a deeper meaning, just possess one for ourselves. In showing us what Grenier is remembering while up in the plane, feeling more connected to life, Train Dreams tells us what is most important to him, most important to us all, what makes a life. The little things, smaller events, often ostensibly trivial or unimportant, that stick with us for life. The nice, friendly, sweet moments, the negative, embarrassing, shameful ones, and everything in between. Life will force you to contemplate your decisions, your history, and why you're still here. And moments like this take a step towards answering those questions. And ultimately, to me, that's what Train Dreams, especially in its ending, is about. The significance and insignificance of life, its simplicities and its complexities. How simple Grenier's life is, yet how complex it becomes. His actions are infinitesimally small in the grand scheme of things, but his life, to the reader and the viewer, is huge. He has very little impact on humanity overall and leaves little behind him. Yet for 116 pages, for 104 minutes, it's perhaps the only thing that matters. Just as it would if it had followed any other character, from Fu Sheng to Ann Peoples to Elijah Brown. As Joel Edgerton says, we will be forgotten eventually, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't live while we're around.
We will all be forgotten unless we're, some criminal or a politician or a famous artist of some kind that's written into history. But we all contribute to the world, and we're all insignificant and will be forgotten to a degree, but we did contribute something.
Most of us are probably not going to cure any diseases or contribute any great, long-lasting art to the world. I've made some decent videos, maybe even one or two good ones, and built an audience I'm incredibly grateful for, but I certainly don't do it for legacy or praise or significance. If that were the case, I probably wouldn't have written so many thousands of words about movies and video games. I'm doing it because I'm alive now, and this is what I want to create now. The only legacy I wish to leave, if I leave any at all, to anyone I meet, anyone who sees anything I make, any young people whose lives on which I may have an impact, is one that requires no name or attribution, one that should be the default for everyone. Be kind, love hard, protect those who need it. Be a voice for the voiceless, provide a space for the marginalized, try to help those who are disadvantaged. Live your life. Let our obituaries speak of our accomplishments, but let our legacies be love and kindness. And one day, when nobody still living can actively recall the look of our faces with their own eyes, our voices with their own ears, or our touch with their own hands, when all that remains is a digital archive within a digital graveyard, or a real gravestone within a real one, old videos rarely watched or abandoned photographs seldom viewed, let it be known that we lived a life that was our own, at peace.